Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Brian Beckcom. My next guest is truly one of the most interesting people I have ever met in my life. I'm talking about Javier Chapa. Javier got the film bug while in the Corps Cadets at Texas A&M when he and some of his fellow cadets worked as military extras on Ed Zwick's Gulf War action drama, Courage Under Fire. The experience inspired Javier to move to Los Angeles after graduating from law school. He made his first film for $25,000. It was called Harvest of Redemption. It is a true story about the struggle of migrant farm workers, and it won multiple awards, including Best Foreign Drama at the 2007 International Family Film Festival, which was sponsored by Warner Brothers and DreamWorks. After Harvest of Redemption was released, Javier was asked by Oscar-nominated actor, director, and writer Ed Harris to assist him on his new film, Appaloosa, which starred Viggo Mortensen, Mr. Harris, and Renee Zellweger. In August of 2010, Javier was chosen to be part of the prestigious Disney ABC Directing Fellowship, where for 2 years he worked on shows like Grey's Anatomy and Castle. He has since launched his own multimedia company called Mucho Mas, which focuses on producing content and representing people of color on both sides of the camera. His company recently produced On the Line starring Dennis Quaid with a Latin cast which will be released in 2021. And he's also secured the life rights to Bertus Deitman, who is on the July cover of Texas Monthly and is considered the Jackie Robinson of rodeo. Javier grew up in South Texas. He comes from a tremendous family. His father is a well-known attorney. His brother's also an attorney. Javier was a competitive cowboy and competed in roping competitions. He was also a star football player and went to law school and graduated from law school. After law school, he also worked for a short period of time as a model. Javier is one of those people that when you first meet him, you immediately like him. He's a servant-based leader. His focus now is helping people, young people especially, that want to get into the entertainment industry. And he has opened a lot of doors for a lot of people. In the podcast, Javier and I talk about his biography, how he got into Hollywood, what young people who are interested in the movies can do to prepare themselves for an entertainment career, Javier's philosophy about leadership, what he's doing to help people of color, and particularly Latin people, land not only acting jobs, but also producing, directing, writing jobs on, like he says, on both sides of the camera. We talk a lot about his philosophy of leadership, what he thinks the future of Hollywood movies looks like, the future of entertainment, and a lot of other things. I think you're really, really going to like listening to Javier. He is truly an intelligent, kind, energetic, positive leader. And now I give you Javier Chapa. Hey, everybody. I have got truly the most interesting man in the world on the podcast today, Javier Chapa. Jav, how you doing, buddy?
Doing great, Brian. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on your wonderful podcast.
Thanks for coming on. You're in California right now, and we're in the beginning of September. We're, like I've talked to a bunch of my guests on the podcast, there's a bunch of stuff going on that is not very positive in the country. We've still got the virus going on. We've got the political stuff, which is rather heated. We've got some unrest, civil unrest about various issues. But I'm so glad that you came on the podcast, because when I say the most interesting man in the world, I mean, your resume, your story is unbelievable. But before we get into that, and you're a Hollywood producer now, you've been an actor, you've been a director. Before we get into all that stuff, how you doing, man? Everything going okay?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I think we have a bad connection, though.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. That works good. So everything going okay in your world?
Yeah, given the state of the world relative to everything happening, I certainly feel terrible about these terrible tragic deaths and people losing their jobs, like I mentioned. But otherwise, I'm doing okay. I'm here, like you pointed out, in sunny California, and decided to do this outdoors because it's a nice, beautiful day, and I'm tired of being ensconced in my house, to be really honest with you.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. So let me ask you this question right out of the gate, because I noticed this on your biography. You live with your wife and 7 rescue dogs?
Yes, sir. That's correct. I've got 7 rescue dogs. Those are my kids, I
What's
guess if you can call them that. They're great. We love them all. They come from all over, from Mississippi to Texas to Canada. Those are pretty much our children.
So what's the story behind having 7 rescue dogs? Like, how did you get interested in that?
I've always been a huge lover. Obviously, I grew up on a cattle out down in South Texas, so we always had dogs around. But this has certainly gotten a little out of control. I think I'm one dog away from being on Animal Hoarders, that show on TV, probably. But my wife's a huge dog lover as well, and when we got together and started dating way back when, she had a dog, and then we got another dog together, and then my dad sent us a dog from Texas, and then it just got a little out of control. But we love them; they're great dogs, and they're all so unique and different in their own way. But we love rescuing dogs. I think that's really important.
And you come from South Texas. You come from an incredible family in South Texas. I think your dad's a lawyer, your brother's a lawyer. You were a badass cowboy growing up. So you've always been around animals, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, grew up in South Texas, 30 miles from McAllen on a cattle ranch. I am definitely the black sheep of my family, being out here in the movie business in Hollywood. My family, or my old man's a retired criminal defense lawyer. My brother's a personal injury lawyer. My sister-in-law's a judge. You name it. It was quite a shock to my family when I told them after I had graduated from law school that I was going to move out to Hollywood and get in the movie business.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So what was it like? Tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in such a cool South Texas family. And not only were you truly a really good cowboy, but you were also a very high level high school athlete. So tell us a little bit about what it was like, some of the lessons you maybe learned growing up in South Texas as both a cowboy and a badass athlete.
Thank you for saying that, Brian. I don't know if I was a badass athlete, but it was great. Growing up on the ranch, it's funny when you grow up on a ranch. I don't think you appreciate it. I think you want to move to a big city and work in that environment. And I feel like now, as I get older, certainly I want to move back to the ranch. It's like, take me back to the ranch. But that was great. Listen, I had great parents. I feel like they taught us to have a strong moral compass and to be good people. And I had an incredible brother and sister. I'm the youngest of 3. My brother was very competitive, and I think he always taught me to be better than him, which I loved. Not out of competition, but like, hey man, if I'm an all district football player, you need to be all state. And that always resonated with me and stuck with me. And my brother was really supportive to this day, and he still is, and he's a good man. But growing up obviously on a cattle ranch out in the middle of the country, I had to drive 30 miles back and forth to school every day. And at one point my parents during my freshman year sent me off to military school, a school called Texas Military Institute, which is great, where I learned a lot of discipline and met some wonderful people and colleagues that are still friends of mine to this day. And it was a 2A school. It was a private school outside of San Antonio. And I told my old man, I was like, I always wanted to play college football. And I said, I'm never going to be able to play college football if you keep me at this school. So he moved me back down and threw me in the fray of 5A football, public school, Edinburgh North. It was a new school at the time. And I started as a quarterback. I was a quarterback since I played for a little school in elementary called Brewster School, which was a great little rural school. And the coach was like, you're too good an athlete. I'm not trying to pat myself on the shoulder, but he was like, I want to put you on the football field when you're a sophomore. And so he put me on the other side of the football. He's like, you understand quarterback, so I'm going to make you a free safety. So that's how I became a free safety. And then eventually, the great irony of this whole story is that my dreams of playing college football were crushed when the 5th game of my senior year on a kickoff, I was running down the other tackle a guy, and 2 guys took my knee out, and that was it. So yeah. I think it was honestly probably a godsend for me personally, that just in terms of my personal trajectory and career. But
isn't that funny how that works, Hav? Like I can look back on my life and there's 2 or 3 major events that at the time I thought were terrible. Like I was so upset. I'll give you one example. When I left the big law firm I started at. I tried to get a job at a very small law firm, which I thought I was a shoo-in for, and I did not get it. I was so upset about it. But looking back on that, is probably one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life, because had I got that job, I would not have met my current law partner, who's one of the best people I've ever met in my life. I wouldn't have the firm I have now. And so isn't that funny how sometimes, yeah, I think that's really interesting how you say that. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you, or what seem like the worst things that happen to you, turn out to be some of the best things that happen to you.
Said, yeah.
So tell us a little bit, because I know there'll be a lot of people interested in your cowboying. So tell us a little bit about what it was like because I think weren't you a competitive roper at some point?
Yeah, I was a team roper. My brother and my brother was a header, I was a heeler, and we rode calves. We did TYRA circuit, YRA, AJRA. It was great. It was, I love horses. Obviously I love animals in general. And it was a great way to keep, my old man kept us out of trouble. And it taught us responsibility and gave us something to do, and gave us a competitive spirit in terms of making the rounds and doing the circuit and rodeo. I started riding. I actually started barrel racing because our roping coach at the time was like, you've got to be a good horseman first.
Yeah.
So I used to go to the sheriff's posse in Edinburgh, Texas, every Friday night. And I had this horse, his name was Rojo, which means obviously red. And he was like a 16-year-old horse. He wasn't very fast, but he was very docile and gentle. And that's how I learned when I was about 6 years old how to ride barrels, and became pretty good on a horse and a horseback. And then eventually got into calf roping, and my dad built an arena out in the ranch for us. My brother and I would wake up in the morning and rope, go to school, come back and rope rope pretty much until the sun went down. And then at one point, my old man got us, some lights, so we'd rope till wee hours in the morning.
Nice.
It was something I really loved. I loved traveling. I loved taking care of the horses. I love the competitive nature of it. I was roping with guys like Cody O, who's an all-around world champion cowboy, to Blair Burt, to a lot of these guys. And so it was a great competitive environment, but at the same time, it taught us a lot of discipline and responsibility that I think is important in your formative years. And eventually, I basically wanted to be like the Latino man from Snowy River. And I told my old man that I wanted to be, I told him that I wanted to be a professional cowboy, and he's, you're out of your mind, you're gonna get an education. And once again, my dreams were crushed, even though he did the right thing at the time. For
sure. And one of the things that people that don't know a lot about rodeo, maybe they don't appreciate, is like the different events in the rodeo, by and large, are designed to mimic what cowboys would actually do when they were actually out there cowboying.
Right.
So this is not, it's turned, the rodeo now is more of a demonstration of cowboy skills, but these were practical skills that people were actually using when they were doing ranching for real, right?
That's right, which I did a lot of, by the way. My grandfather we had about 200 head of Black Angus cows.
Yeah.
And we would work cattle on horseback. We would brand cattle and build fences. And so I've been on horseback, like I said, since I was a kid. And that's the one thing I miss about having moved out here, being out here now 19 years, is like not being able to ride. There's certainly places out here that you can find areas to ride and equestrian stables and stuff. But I've got to get back to the ranch, like I said, when we started this conversation. Too much big city for this country boy.
Exactly. Yeah. So you grow up in a well-respected Hispanic family in South Texas. You're a rancher, you're a cowboy, you were a high-level football player, and then you end up going, do you go straight to A&M after you graduate from high school?
Yeah, so the first school I got accepted to was the University of Texas, and one of my dear friends, Brandon Henderson, who is still a dear friend to this day, who grew up in McAllen. You obviously know the Hendersons. I'm sure you know Chris.
Sure, very well.
Jimmy, yeah. So he was like, "Hey, man, you got to go into A&M and be my roommate and join this Corps of Cadets. my brother's the first sergeant. It'll be fun. It'll be cool." And so I was like, "What the hell?" So that's how I ended up going to A&M, ironically. And had I not gone to Aggie Land, truth be told, I wouldn't be out here and in this business, which is crazy, you know?
Yeah. And that's what I want to get to that here in a second, because how a guy from South Texas who's a rancher and a football player and then goes to A&M and joins the Corps of Cadets, ends up in Hollywood, I think is a really interesting story. So you end up going to A&M, you're in the Corps of Cadets. That's where you and I met. We've known each other for 25 plus years. And then you go to law school after you graduate?
No, so honestly, this business really found me at Aggie Land when we had the opportunity on Courage Under Fire. And I'd never been on a movie set before in my life. And I was just very taken by the experience, interfacing with these actors and the director and Denzel Washington and Meg Ryan. And that's where I got the glint in my eye, on that fire in my belly. And I was like, wow, this is cool. People can actually, you can make movies for a living. And this, I was very fascinated by it. So that's where kind of the seed started for me, was at Aggie Land of all places. And I ended up graduating after that, obviously with a degree in ag development, and I didn't want to go home and be a farmer, even though I loved farming and I had a lot of respect for my grandfather. He was a very successful farmer, and I have a lot of respect for farmers, but it just wasn't something that I was super passionate about. And that film experience really still stuck with me. And I remember telling some buddies of mine at Aggie Land after that experience, I was like, man, I'm gonna get in the movie business. I'm gonna move to Hollywood. They thought it was crazy. They thought it was nuts. They probably still think I'm nuts, but
So I think it's fair to say that both of us were in the Corps. The idea of going to Hollywood, you would have gotten a little bit of grief for that, to say the very least.
Absolutely. Right? And so that's how I got, like I said, kind of this fire in my belly to want to get in the movie business, was at Aggie Land, working on that film. And graduated a degree in ag development. I was like, what the hell? I'll go and get a law degree. And I thought it'd be a good degree to have, and it would give me some time to figure out how to get in the movie business. And so ended up getting accepted to St. Mary's, which is probably the only school that would take me at the time. And honestly, I spent more time, Brian, studying film at St. Mary's. I'm not even sure how I ended up graduating.
So when you say you got the bug at A&M, I mean, you really got the bug. You were, once you did this, once it had captured your attention, it sounds like you were pretty obsessed with it in a way.
I was. Yeah. I was like, this is what I want to do.
So let me ask you this question, not to interrupt you, but let me ask you this. For folks that are interested, especially like the young folks that are listening right now, in getting into the movie business or the entertainment business, like what kind of things were you studying? What were you looking at? What would you recommend to people that are interested in the entertainment business to look at to prepare for a career in the entertainment business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think there's no right or wrong way into the business. I engrossed myself in a lot of reading. You know, I read a lot of books on producing, editing, writing, the hero's journey, myths and movies. Just as much as I could get my hands on in terms of reading was important to me. Especially if you want to be a storyteller, you've got to be reading stories, not just books, but reading Texas Monthly and finding articles and just finding incredible stories out there that no one's found.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of it for sure. I would say the other thing I did is I bought a camera.
Nice.
If you want to tell stories, you got to buy a camera. I think, look, information is ubiquitous, and technology now is at your fingertips, and there's no excuse that if you have a great story to tell and you've got a camera, go out and tell that story. You're going to make mistakes, and I promise you're going to make some bad films, and I'll continue to make bad films. I've made my share of bad films. I've made my share of good films as well, but that's just part of the process, and being fearless and going out there and not being scared to expose yourself from a story point of view and emotionally as well sometimes, because it's part of your craft in terms of whether you're a writer or director. It exudes who you are.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of different ways in, Brian. I mean, to answer your question, there is the do-it-yourself way. Me, I didn't go to film school.
Yeah.
I just started to read, and I started to write scripts on my own that weren't very good until I got better. I started to audit Meisner courses when I was in St. Mary's. I would drive twice a week with a friend of mine and to Austin, Texas, and we would audit Meisner courses where I met guys like the Duplass brothers who were making movies on their credit cards. And I knew that the only way that I was going to find a way in was by meeting people and figuring out, okay, where is it that I want to be? Do I want to be on this side of the camera? Do I want to be on the other side of the camera? But I knew that I had to expose myself to those relationships and those opportunities. And I knew that I had to be well-rounded enough to when I got in a position where I was a producer, that I'd done all those jobs. I'd worked on a set, moving lights, and I'd been behind the camera before, and I directed stuff before, and I'd written stuff before, so that I understood the people that I was working with, and I had a point of view about what they were doing, and so that I could help them be better at their craft. And that's kind of what stuck with me, because I was a guy that was reading books like Robert Rodriguez, who I think is an incredible inspiration.
Yeah, Austin, right?
Austin, Texas. I read his book.
Incredible individual, very smart.
Really
I listened to a podcast that he was on a couple years ago, and I was blown away about how smart he is.
Love Robert. He's really emblematic of what we're talking about. I was going to make my first film, and then I'll come back to answering more of your question on how to get in the business, because I feel like I've skirted it slightly. But when I was making my first movie, I had $25,000. It was my first film, and I'd read Robert's book, Rebel Without a Crew, which I recommend to anyone wanting to be a filmmaker or just getting in the business in general. It's an incredible book, and it really inspired me. I was like, man, this guy made this movie, El Mariachi, for $7,000. I can do this for $25,000. I had a pretty ambitious film. It was based on a true story. It was a period piece. I had 33 actors and 40 locations, and I went to my local mayor, the town of Rio Grande City, the local mayor, and I said, listen, I've got a 35-man crew. I don't know how I'm going to house them. I don't know how I'm going to feed them. I said, I've got an ambitious film here. Will you help me out? And sure enough, he basically gave me the keys to the city and said, I'll give you cops. I'll feed your crew. I'll house them for you. And it was the best. It was my first lesson in producing 101.
Yeah.
And that's where my point to all this is, that's where my film school started. I think the only way to really learn outside of theory, and obviously it's important to meet your colleagues and your peers that you're going to be working with. That's why I think film school is really important. But the only way to learn is to do, whether you want to be a writer, whether you want to be a director or a producer or an actor, you've got to do the work.
Totally agree with you on that. And I think that concept applies pretty much across the board. Like, for instance, I like to play golf. I can't become a good golfer by reading golf books. I got to get out there and swing the damn golf club. Same thing with being a lawyer. Same thing with being a businessman. You can, at some point, you can read yourself into futility. You got to get out there and actually
do it.
Do the work. Yeah, and there were so many things that you said just now that I really want to talk about that are very wise. But so let me break down just a little bit some of the things you said that I really want you to elaborate on. So one of the things you talked about is the hero's journey. The hero's journey, for those people that don't know, is, well, it's a book by a guy, I think his name is Joseph
Campbell.
Yeah, and it's basically the idea is, throughout all of human history, there's been certain archetypal stories, and the hero's journey is like the classic archetypal story. And essentially it says, if you want to tell a compelling story, this is one framework in which to do it. And essentially you have a protagonist who is confronted with a series of challenges. Typically they also go off and, into the wilderness, or they go away for a while, and then they overcome the challenges, and it's called the hero's journey. So talk a little bit more about that, because that is such a famous book. It is such a fundamental principle of storytelling. Talk a little bit more about the hero's journey and kind of what you learned and how you applied that into what you're doing. What's that?
Yeah, I haven't read a hero's journey in a long time, but I'll,
me neither.
But I'll do my best with the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah.
I think any of all these books, I think you take ideas from all these materials, and you got to find your own kind of style and your own point of view and your own voice. That's what I've learned. There's only really 5 ideas in the universe, right? It's like, how do you reinvent them in a fresh way?
Yeah.
And I think what these books teach you is structure, which is important, and the bare necessities of, okay, if you're going to write a screenplay or you're going to tell a great story, these are the things that probably should be in it, or that in history have been these films have been successful because of that. The other book that really is great at breaking that down from genre to genre is Myth in the Movies.
Myth in the Movies.
Yeah,
I've not heard of that one. I'll check that one out too. Yeah.
that's my Bible for the business. I refer to it a lot. I read it a lot. But I've read a lot of different books across the board. But certainly Hero's Journey is a very, very famous one. Save the Cat's another famous one for writers.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Brian, I think it's about finding your own voice. That's the most important thing. And that takes time to develop that voice and to find the things that you really gravitate toward. What genre do you love? Do you love horror and thrillers? Do you love comedy? What are the genres that really gravitate toward who you are as a person and the stories you want to tell, and what life experiences that you have inside of you that potentially would best suit that genre? I think that's important part of the process.
Yeah. And it's not, I guess there are some people like this, but the point, and it's very clear from listening to you, you don't just become a Hollywood director by accident. You don't become a producer. You don't become it's a craft, and you have to work at it, and you have to work hard at it. And the other thing, you said 4 or 5 things that I was trying to flag in my head. The other thing you said, which I think is super important, that I just had a realization about earlier this year, is you got to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to make a movie that is a complete bomb in order to have a movie that's really good. And one of the things that I caught myself earlier in the year, Hav, is I was like, man, I'm getting too complacent. I've got a great job. I've got a great family, all that. I'm not challenging myself enough. I need to get out there and try some stuff. So I started jujitsu and some other things, like some things that I was a little bit uncomfortable with, including this podcast. And I said, man, I just got to get out there and try some stuff. I'm playing it too safe. And for sure, in the entertainment industry in Hollywood, it's a risky industry, let's be honest. So you have to be willing to get out there and totally fail. And the thing about it is, when you fail in your profession, you can't hide it. It's public. People know you failed. So how do you think about risk? How do you think about success and failure as it relates to your business?
That's a good question. And I want to expand on what you were talking about, because I agree with you, and I apply with what you're talking about. There's something that I always say to myself is that, like, seek discomfort, right?
Yeah.
You've got to try different things. It doesn't.
Man, not to interrupt you, Hob, but I got a reminder that pops up on my iPhone every morning that says, whatever you're nervous about is what you should be doing, probably. That's essentially, exactly right? Seeking discomfort. I love that idea, seeking discomfort.
I think seeking discomfort is an important part of my life and my business. Something that I picked up on in the last 5 years that really started to shift things for me. Think about it, whether you're an athlete, whether you're exercising, doing the same rote kind of repetition over and over doesn't get you anywhere.
Exactly.
It's the same thing with your brain. You've got to disrupt it a little bit and try different things.
Yeah.
And teach it new things. That's how you grow. And part of that growth is failure, and being fearless, and not being idiotic and stupid and careless and reckless, but taking calculated risks based on not being scared of the outcome. And I deal with that every day. I'm in a business where we're risking millions of dollars on movies.
With literally no guarantee that any movie is going to make one penny.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And the other thing is, how there's this book by a famous author he wrote a book called Black Swan. His name's Nassim Nicholas Taleb or something. He wrote another book called Anti-Fragile. And the concept behind the book is there's basically 3 kinds of systems. There's fragile systems that break easily. There's robust systems that don't break easily, but if you put enough stress on them, eventually they break. And then there's anti-fragile systems, and anti-fragile systems are systems that get stronger when you put stress on them. Just think about lifting weights, right? You're putting stress on your body, but you're making your body stronger by putting stress on your body. And so I think it's the same concept that you're talking about, seeking discomfort and not being afraid of failure. But by putting yourself out there, you're making yourself over the long term a lot smarter, a lot stronger, a lot more resilient, things like that. Well, the other thing that you mentioned is, and I really want to flag this because I really believe this, and I think this is very important, and it's a very important concept. I am convinced that the most powerful thing in human history now and in all of human history is the power of ideas and the power of stories. I think the most powerful way to convey ideas to people is through storytelling.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your experience with the power of storytelling, your creative process, and some of the impact that you feel like you can have by telling the stories that you're telling.
Yeah, so I agree with you 100%, Brian. First of all, yes, content in general, because now it's content. It's not just film. It's not television. It's content, whether it's a minute long or whether it's 2 hours long. It's certainly a very powerful medium, and it's a blessing and a curse, because when it's powerful and effective and compelling, it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
But when it
Yeah.
sucks, it's terrible. You're either a hero or a goat.
For sure. Yeah.
And that's kind of the upside and the downside of being in this business and being in a position where you're exposing yourself emotionally and otherwise. You're opening your window in your soul to the world by sharing your ideas and by sharing your stories.
Yeah.
Just to talk a little bit about my process, when I moved out here, and by the way, I moved out here with the advice of a federal judge who was the first Hispanic federal judge to be appointed by the bench by Jimmy Carter. His name was
that Benavidez?
Hippo.
Oh, yeah, Garcia. Yeah, a mutual friend of ours and one of my podcast guests, I think, clerked for him, Julian Gomez.
Yeah, that's right. I clerked for Hippo as well, my last year of law school, and he always wanted to be a movie director, and he told me, hey, Chapa, if you're not passionate about practicing like you are about movies, why don't you get in the movie business? He said, don't take the bar, get your law degree, and get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
He ended up passing away 2 weeks before I graduated law school. He was sick, he had diabetes, and I took that as a sign. And so I moved out here not to the day, but close to the month, about 19 years ago. And the first thing I realized, I'd had some experience, obviously, making short films and writing stuff and reading and doing the things I was talking about in San Antonio and Austin. But the first thing I realized is, if I don't pick a lane, I'm going to get swallowed up and lost in this business, because I'm an outsider. I'm a fringe guy. I didn't go to film school, but I've got to lean into something that I understand and that inspires me and that I believe in. And that's how I really started to lean on my Latino roots and my Latino culture. And when I got out here, I realized there wasn't that many filmmakers. And yet, even though the Hispanic market is the most aggressive consumer of media across all platforms, there wasn't a lot of people making films that spoke and celebrated the culture.
Yeah.
And so that's where my creative process started, in terms of, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to get really good at. So I staked a flag in the ground. I named my company Hippo Films after Hippo. Everybody's like, why did you name your company after hippopotamus? I said, I didn't. I named it after a federal judge who wanted to be a movie director.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and it's still my holding company. Mucho Mas is still owned by Hippo. It's a company that I will never let go of.
Nice.
Because of Hippo and the things that I learned from him and the inspiration he gave me to have the guts to move out here.
Yeah.
But going back to process, that's how I really leaned into inclusive narratives and seeing a lack thereof. And I was like, man, this is something I understand. I grew up on the border. I'm a half-breed. My dad's Mexicano. My mom's German. But I'm very connected to my Latino culture. And it's something that's very important to me. And the way I started really was just by doing. I'd already been doing it a little bit in Texas. But when I moved out here, I was like, all right, dude, you're now doing this like full time for a living, aside from bartending at night and having some 23-year-old kid, even though I had a law degree, boss me around and make me cut limes in the basement of a place called Miyagi's off Sunset so I could pay the bills.
Yeah.
And that was a very humbling experience for me, having a law degree and like literally, I'm not kidding when I say cutting limes in this huge 5-gallon tub in the basement while I was pursuing this career.
Yeah.
But when I moved out here, I was still doing some of the acting because I figured, again, like I talked to you about previously, it was a good way for me to meet people. I knew I wasn't a good actor. I knew I'd never wanted to be an actor, but I would get these commercial gigs because I was like the 6'1" Latino dude that played the young dad.
I was going to say, man, I got to say this, Hob, not to interrupt you, but for those of you that are just listening on the podcast, I would strongly encourage you to go to YouTube and look at how handsome this man is. Because yeah, let's be honest with you, you want your strength, you look like a leading man, and that is helpful. And that's probably one of the reasons you ended up being the Latin Marky Mark, basically. And so how do you, I got to ask you this because we've never talked about this, but I want to hear the story.
You know, funny, when I was, I'm gonna use reductionism here, but when I was dating a girl in school who wanted to be a model. I went to this Model Search America thing. It was like this huge national modeling thing. I was there being supportive. All these agents were coming up to me, handing me their business cards. I was like, look, man, I'm not trying to be in this business. I'm fascinated by film. I want to get into producing and maybe filmmaking, but not modeling and acting.
Yeah.
And just on a whim, I remember one of the guys, he was an agent in New York. His name was Anthony Higgins. I'll never forget his name. His card was sitting on next to my nightstand. And I was like, what the hell? I'm going to give this guy a call.
Yeah.
So I call this guy up and he's, man, I love your look. We don't have any Latinos on our roster. You're tall. You're a half breed.
Tall, dark, and handsome.
You were a cowboy. I don't know about the tall, dark, and handsome. He's like, you're a cowboy. I can sell all that stuff. We can do beer ads with you, yada, yada. So he flew me out to New York and did a test shoot with me. And the rest was kind of history. I ended up signing with a pretty big agency called Wilhelmina Models. I don't know if you've heard of them. And then
yeah,
Ford,
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, Ford and Wilhelmina. And I was much skinnier back then, you know, and promise you, did not look, for whoever's watching this, did not look the way I look now. Yeah. And I also worked with a big agency in Dallas for a short stint called Kim Dawson, which is a big agency out of Dallas, Texas. And that's where it all started for me, like in terms of, I was able to pay the bills doing that, right? Yeah. Fly all over. They'd fly me out I'd fly out to places like Spain and do a beer commercial for a week and make a lot of money. Back then, those commercials were paying a lot of money. Yeah. One, in fact, was like a non-alcoholic beer where they wanted me to ride a bar stool.
None of our buddies ever busted your balls about any of that stuff, I'm sure, right? You know, in all seriousness, modeling is a form of storytelling. What they're doing is they're putting together ads that tell a story to try to sell a particular product. And so in some ways, I would think that your modeling experience was complementary to your producing, directing, and writing experience.
Yeah, that's a very nice way of putting it, Brian. Thank you, though. It is really, it's about meeting, like I said, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's about meeting people. It's about understanding how to get people, to inspire people and to get them to follow you, really. That's what it's about. Yeah. And to believe in what you're doing, especially if you're in a leadership position as a director or producer. It's important to, for lack of a better phrase, be able to win people over and for them to trust you in what you're doing and to get behind your passion and your vision.
Yeah.
Sure. It's a form of storytelling in one way or another. But for me, it was a jumping off point for bigger stuff.
Yeah.
And it was an opportunity to make some money.
Yeah.
While I was doing the bartending at night, during the day, I'd do commercials or I'd do some print jobs.
Yeah.
And then eventually I transitioned out of that when I got the inspiration to do my first film as a director. And then the rest became about, okay, how am I going to find my next film? And how's it going to be bigger? And so my goal was to double. If I made my first film for $25,000, I was like, how can I make my next film for 50 and then 100 and 200 and 400?
Yeah.
It didn't work out that way. It actually exponentially, I made each one for a lot more than that, but that was just for me, it's about setting small goals sometimes. I think sometimes that's more important than setting these big lofty goals. It's about, I read this book called Atomic Habits, and it talks a lot about
Great
that.
book. James Clear. I love that book. Yeah.
Really good book.
Yeah.
So that's where it all started for me. I was living out here with a girlfriend at the time that I'd met doing modeling, and a guy just trying to find his way. And eventually I got handed this great story that I fell in love with, because it was a story that was rooted in the Rio Grande Valley.
Yeah.
And needed a director. And so I just jumped in and I read Robert's book, like I said, Rebel Without a Crew. And I was just like, what the hell? We wanted to raise about $150,000 for the movie. And my partner, who actually a girl went to law school, a dear friend of mine, Laura Pettis is her name, who is not practicing law either and is in the business out in Austin. Her and I set a goal of she was going to produce the film, I was going to direct it. And we said, we're going to raise $150,000 by this date. And if we don't, whatever we have, we're going to go out and make the movie. And that's how you got to do things. The train has to leave the station. And I think people don't really take you serious until you say to them, hey man, the train's leaving the station. We are doing this.
Yeah.
A lot of people sit around and talk about doing things in this business, talk about writing, talk about filmmaking, but they don't actually do.
Yeah.
And that was a valuable lesson to me. Like the second we did that, it was incredible how much support we got and how people really got behind our vision and passion for this story and got us to the finish line. And that's what it's about.
I'm literally getting goosebumps right now listening to you talk, Hob. And here's one of the reasons why. I have discovered, I think this is the 20th or 21st podcast episode I've done. And I have discovered that there are a lot of commonalities between, and my guests have been incredible. For instance, I'm releasing a podcast on Monday that I am so excited about, I can barely contain myself. And it's with District Attorney Dusty Boyd, who you know.
Oh, I love Dusty.
And one of the things that Dusty is doing, Dusty is putting action behind his words. Like there's a lot of people that are talking right now about a lot of different things, and we ought to do this and we ought to do that. You know, here's how we can help with this or help with that. And what I've found is people like Dusty, people like Cyril White, who I had on my podcast, people like you, people like Blake. Yeah, they can talk and they can talk as much as they want, but they don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk. They get out there and actually make things happen. And one of the themes that I've been exploring on the podcast, especially as it relates to like the racial unrest right now, is the idea of symbolic versus substantive change. And the notion there is tearing down a statute doesn't accomplish anything of substance. Let's talk about how we can solve real problems substantively. And so I love hearing you talk about how you could have talked about being a director or making a movie for 20 years and never done anything and never done it. At some point, you got to get out there and actually do the work, right?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. No,
this movie, by the way, we haven't. This is the movie. The first movie you made was called Harvest of Redemption, right?
That's correct. Yeah,
and it won a bunch of awards. And you made it for $25,000, and I think it was released in 2007, if I'm remembering.
Yeah, 2007. That's
right. Yeah, and so that really, you know, that's an incredible story. So keep telling us a little bit about how you basically just said, "I'm gonna make a movie." Went out and made a damn movie for $25,000. Keep walking us through that.
Yeah, I'd say that gave me a lot of confidence, given how many variables there were to that film, and there was a lot of moving parts. It was a very ambitious film, especially for a budget like that. I mean, that's typically craft services coffee budget for most people, you know, on these bigger movies, if they're lucky.
You got to pay somebody $25,000 just to take the orange M&Ms out of the bowl, right? For the main actor.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But it gave me a lot of confidence to go, okay, I did this. And I went A to Z and I finished it and I sold it and it won some awards. Did it do anything for me in terms of my career as a filmmaker? No. But what it did is it really inspired me to go, okay, no one's really leaning into this Latino focused content right now.
Yeah.
But what I want to do is that I want to inspire and teach people of color that they can do this and to lift them up and a champion for them and become a voice for them and to help get their stories out in the world. And that's when my kind of business hat, my creative hat shifted a little bit more to business / creative. And that's when I decided I need to launch a company that has a few things going on. And that's Mucho Mas, which is that logo behind you.
That's for people that are just listening to the podcast. This episode's background is Mucho Mas. That's Hobbs. Is it a production company? Is that the right terminology to use?
That's right. Yeah. It's I would say it's more of a multimedia company. So Mucho Mas, there's a production arm that produces, finances, and develops content, both film and television, primarily with the Latinx bent. And then I launched a company a few years ago called Inclusion, which is a management company where we represent about 70 actors, writers, directors, producers on both sides of the camera, which is why I'm segueing in all this. Is what segue in all this is that it was important for me, like I said, to kind of show people that didn't have my experiences or opportunities or mentors the ropes and be that voice of reason for them, and to try to open doors for them, give them opportunities, which I think we've done a really great job of. I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back, but the last film we just did, the Dennis Quaid film that we just shot in the Dominican Republic, true story. Our client from Austin, Texas, Julio Quintana, who was Terrence Malick's protege, really talented. He wrote and directed the movie. And our other client, Jimmy Gonzalez from Texas, starred opposite Dennis Quaid.
Nice.
And that would have never happened. This was a pretty big film for the players that were involved between Sony, Provident, Endeavor Content. And I really fought for Julio and for Jimmy and said, man, we have to storytelling should be reflected in the world we live in.
Yeah.
And that's currently not the case. So I was like, we've got to do that with this film, and we've got to do it one film, one TV series at a time. And that's where I really started to that's why I get up in the morning, and that's where I really get passionate, and this fire in my belly is to help people. And I bring all this up to tell you a little bit more about my company. The production company of it all, everybody's got a production company out here, or at least they act like they do. That's easy. For me, the important part was building a company like Inclusion that supported our overall ethos and vision for what it is we're trying to accomplish and trying to change the messaging.
Yeah.
And I grew up seeing Latinos reflected in a really negative light. There were either perpetrators of crime on television, or it's always the gardener.
Or just like a caricature of the
right.
Latino Hispanic experience. Yeah.
Exactly. The gangbanger or the incarcerated. And so we're trying to change that narrative. And I think the only way we can do that is to put out product that's not reflective of that. Right.
And not to get on a side conversation here, Hob, but I think there's a lot of people, especially I'm a 7th generation Texan. I've been in Texas forever. And I know your family's been in Texas for a long time. And like Julian Gomez's family was in Texas before it was even Texas. But there for people that aren't familiar with Texas and Texas geography, the South Texas border area, to me, that's always been one of my favorite places on earth, because it is such a unique mixture of Hispanic and Latin and German and all sorts of different cultures. When I go down there, I feel like almost like I'm in a different country in a way. But when it's got the ranching and the hunting and the fishing and it's just a beautiful part of the country. And so I think it's cool that you're basically telling people about that experience and about that part of the country, because a lot of people don't know that there are Hispanic families in South Texas that have been there for 10 generations.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. I think what we're trying to do is bring it all back to our roots in terms of storytelling. And like I said, celebrating the culture in a positive light. And like I said, look, aside from the economic opportunity, there's a real civic and social need right now, especially with everything happening in the world. Not to sound callous, the most important thing is all these poor people dying of COVID.
Right.
Inside the movie business, like, we're not curing cancer out here.
Well,
but I think you're right. What's funny about all this is that I never thought, even though I love it's happened this way, that I would end up coming back to Texas. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second.
Yeah.
Let me just finish on Mucho Mas so that I can tell you where it's headed. So the third vertical I have is an AVOD service we're launching called Vida On Demand, which is a family-focused channel. One of the channels is a pet channel, pet service with Cesar Millan. The other ones is myths, movies and series. And the third is like gaming and just different things.
Yeah.
And then the fourth thing we're doing is we're working with the city of San Antonio of turning the old Brooks Air Force bases into studio space where people can film.
Nice.
Not unlike what Robert Rodriguez out in Austin at the airport hangar.
Yeah.
At the Austin studios. And so I say all that because it all started with Hippo in San Antonio saying to me, son, if you don't want to practice law, get the hell out of here and move to Hollywood. And now I'm coming back to San Antonio, which is really exciting for me. And it's
I'll bet that's really exciting. Yeah. Yeah.
It is. And it's exciting for me to educate young Texans from all walks of life and to show them that you can do this if you want to do it, whether you want to be a technician on a set or a filmmaker, a producer, a writer, whatever it is you want to do, and working with the local communities and bringing more jobs to the city of San Antonio and to the state of Texas. I think all of that's really important. We got a little bit of work to do on the legislative side to get there. But the one thing that San Antonio is doing a good job of is they've actually given filmmakers 10% more than any other city in the state of Texas, which I think is incredible.
Nice. Nice.
And that's why we're positioning ourselves there. We also have some partners there that are investing in our company. So it's an obvious kind of fit for us to move to San Antonio and to have a presence there. We've got to stay out here for all the obvious reasons. You know, this is where the action's at. But we're going to have a presence in Texas now and in LA, which I'm really excited about. And just to drive home your point about telling stories, dance with the one that brung you, right? You got to dance with the one that brung you.
For sure.
And that's something that I've never forgotten about.
Well, you know, and you coming back to San Antonio after being in Hollywood is, and I know you're too humble to probably agree with me on this, but in a way, it's another example of the hero's journey. You went away, you faced challenges, you learn from them, and then you come home and you take what you learned to make your home a better place. One of the things, and again, Hav, it's remarkable to me how many commonalities there are in my guests who are all incredible people in a variety of different areas. But one of the things you said earlier is the idea of helping other people accomplish their goals. Like, to me, and Dusty talked about this quite a bit, Dusty considers himself a servant, not really a leader. And so this idea of servant-based leadership, like what, I'm 47 right now, Hav. I was probably 40 or so when I finally realized, hey, guess what, knucklehead? Life is not all about you. Life is about what you can do for other people. It took me a very long time to figure that out, but I love the fact that you talk about how you're in the business basically to help people, to help other people. Is there a better motivation? Is there a better way of living than, you know, and it was remarkable to me when I figured this out, Hob, because what I found is when I help other people, I feel a lot better about myself, like Absolutely. A lot better about myself. So is there a better feeling to you than being able to help somebody in your community that might not otherwise have had an opportunity?
Not at all. I think that's why we do what we do. Not unlike you, I was, not to put words in your mouth, but I was certainly too selfish early on in this.
I was a selfish asshole for a very long time. I'll put it that way.
but you get a bit dazzled by Hollywood and, I can make a lot of money out here. And the funny thing is when you start to help people and you shift your mindset, you start to make the money you wanted to make by helping people.
Isn't that funny how that works?
How it works. It's like, but no, for me, like I said to you, that's why I get up in the morning. Like it really drives me and puts that passion in my gut to help people and to open doors. For me, it's about opening doors. I don't care. Like I said, I don't care what walk of life you come from or what your background is or what culture you come from. I love to be able to say, hey, don't make the same mistakes I made, or let me introduce you to the right people. Perfect example. We just put a client on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Okay. Big movie, right? Big franchise. Yeah. His last movie, he grew up in Harlingen, Texas on the border. His last movie, Brian, was $56,000.
Wow.
He went from making a $56,000 movie. I signed him 2 months ago because I really believe in this kid. His name is David Blue Garcia, incredibly talented. I saw his film Tejano, which is set on the border. And I was like, man, I really believe in you. I want to represent you. And I want to open some doors for you. And he was like, all right, let's do this. Well, after 2 months, again, not patting ourselves on the back, but it's an example of how fulfilling it is, and how it's an example that I think it keeps kids inspired, that whether you're an actor that just got off the bus from Texas, or a filmmaker that made a short film, you can come out here and you can be somebody.
Yeah.
And I think that applies in any business. But I think, and it reminded me that guys like Robert Rodriguez, who had made El Mariachi for $7,000, had a huge career. Look what he's done since then. And I think that's the allure and the excitement of the business, not on the cosmetic fake side of things, but on being able to propel somebody that wouldn't necessarily have the opportunities had we not put them in the right position, or had we not developed them the right way, or opened the right doors, or coached them and empowered them.
And the cool thing about this is, I can virtually guarantee that David is his name, right?
Yeah.
That David, when he is in your shoes, is going to be helping kids just like you helped him. Like, in other words, by doing what you're doing, that it doesn't just help one person. It's like ripples in a pond. It just continues out there. And I think stuff like you're talking about, especially now where there's this sense, and by the way, I think it's in general, I think it's a fake sense that half the country hates the other half. I don't think that's actually true. I think that's just the impression you get from social media and stuff like that. But there is a lot of division right now. And I think one way through this is doing what you're doing. Stop focusing on yourself and start looking at ways you can help people that need help. How can you be a servant? So that's really incredible, Hav. And so to keep telling us a little bit about, because one of the questions I really wanted to ask you, I've been thinking about this for a couple of days, is because of the pandemic, I would imagine a lot of production's been shut down for a period of time. That there's not as many movies, there's not as much content coming out. And this is, look, this pandemic is going to change every industry, and Hollywood is no exception. And so, what is your kind of idea about the future of the entertainment industry? How's it going to change? And by the way, I hear people talk, oh, things are never going to be the same. And I'm like, you know what? Who cares? That's okay. Let's make them better. Well, we don't want things to be the same. We want them to be better. So what do you see as the future of the entertainment industry post-pandemic?
Yeah, look, on one hand, yes, to answer your questions, productions, there's some overseas productions happening right now, but for the most part, the business is trying to find its footing, like a lot of other businesses right now.
Yeah.
On one hand, the streaming business is booming because everybody's staying home.
Yeah.
So the Netflix of the world, Disney Plus.
But eventually they're going to run out of shows. Netflix has started showing me Spanish and German TV series, and I think it's doing that because I've watched every other American.
That is exactly right. That is exactly right. Yeah. And the theatrical business is taking a huge hit, obviously, and a huge blow because of all this.
Yeah.
But I think it was smart. AMC and Universal made this deal where they closed the window to where you can't show a movie on streaming down to 17 days. So what I think's happening, or what I'm seeing happening,
which is a huge deal, by the way, right?
Yeah, it is.
That's a big deal. Matter of fact, I when I was in Colorado this summer for a brief period of time, my next door neighbor was one of the executives at Cinemark, and he was on board meetings every morning on the back porch. I could hear him. Cinemark is in all sorts of trouble right now, but like a lot of leaders, he's not crying about it. He's trying to figure out how to solve the problem.
Yeah, look, I think, the way people are viewing content is already changing and going to change. I think the types of stories they're going to tell moving forward, you're going to see a lot more aspirational, inspirational, like the film we just did. And I think right now, what we're telling all our clients is, like, this is a great opportunity to continue to develop your craft.
Yeah.
To develop. If you've got a script that's not that good, make it great. Or you think it's great, make it amazing. It's also a great time to package projects filmmakers or with talent. So there's a lot of actors reading scripts right now or packaging deals for television. But I think the business, Brian, is definitely on more of the business side and not the talent side. I think content will double because what's going to happen is the studios are now realizing that the model's broken. You know?
Yeah.
And they can't make these big tentpole movies anymore and spend the amount of P&A, which is print and advertising costs, that go behind these types of films where they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes on these huge tentpole releases. So I think what they're going to probably start doing is movies that maybe in the past would have merited more of a theatrical release probably won't.
Yeah.
You know? And they'll probably end up on PVOD or streaming, but you'll see a lot more content. And the challenge is there's a lot more content out there, right?
For sure. One of the problems I have every night is there's so much good stuff. What am I going to watch tonight? But before we go any further, and I'm sure you have the phrase for this, but what we're talking about right now for people who don't know is there used to be basically an agreement that when a new movie came out, it would not be streamed, or it would be in the movie theaters for a window of time before it was streamed. And that's since there's been a couple instances recently where that's changed.
That's correct.
And what's I forget the industry term for that, but
it's just your first run window, basically, is what it's called.
Like the theatrical window or something like
right.
that. And
right.
so now and I think Disney maybe released, was it Hamilton? They released first by streaming or something like that. But anyway, this is a major shift in at least the business model.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you. Mulan's a great example. It's coming out this weekend.
Yeah.
Mulan was going to be a huge. Release. Yeah. And they decided to now put it on Disney Plus, their new SVOD vertical. And that's a big movie, so that movie needs a lot of downloads. But I think that them financially, it probably makes a lot more sense. It's more mitigating the risk. It's more calculated. Whereas, imagine making a movie for $200 million and putting another $200 million in P&A behind it. You're into it for $400,000. If you're splitting the revenues with the exhibitors, meaning the theaters, the thing's going to make $800 million just to break even.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So now I see that as a very disruptive opportunity to make a lot more content, films that don't necessarily need to be in theaters. I think what also is happening is I think a lot of these studios are realizing they have to fish in other ponds. And inclusivity is becoming very important, obviously, and reaching those targeted audiences. If you look at, I'm just going to use my demo because I know it. The Latino demo is, if you look at just California, Texas, and Florida alone, you can reach, that's the majority of Latinos in the United States. Yeah. And so they can target them and not have to spend a lot of money and reach them in very effective ways. And so that's the shift that I'm seeing that I think is the really good thing. And truth be told, I think we needed to hit reset out here. Yeah. Like I said, the model was broken, and just how people are viewing content has certainly changed how we're making content.
Yeah.
And I think it needed to happen, frankly.
And it's amazing what you just said. I could not agree with you more. You said the model needed to change. And in some ways, I think that, again, there's nothing positive about the pandemic. Let's be honest with it, but we can take some lessons from it. And one of the things I think we can take is, look, it's not just Hollywood. There's all sorts of businesses. There's all sorts of things we've been doing. And it's like a way to say, hey, time out. Let's reevaluate whether this model is the right model or not. Like, and a perfect example of that is the school systems. Hey, right. Time out. Does everybody in the entire world have to go to college nowadays? Of course you don't. You can learn basically everything you want to learn online. Right. But then, of course, college has a very important role to play, and high school does too. But the point is this pandemic, if we look at it in a certain way, can give us teaching points, and we can make things better as a result of this.
That's how I feel. I certainly, look, two things. Obviously, it makes you appreciate your loved ones, right, a lot more.
For sure.
Take the time to connect with them and be closer to them and tell them you love them. But beyond that, I think it's, like I said, I think it's a really disruptive environment.
Yeah.
And we've had to evaluate our business today. How are we going to pivot in an effective way? And it's been good for us.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of team meetings and talked about how we're going to change things moving forward. And we're doing really well because of it, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I'm glad, again, not to sound callous about all the poor people dying in the world. I'm not glad
Right.
that's happening right now.
Of course not.
But I am glad that things are changing in my business and that we had to make a shift and pivot. And I think that's part of running a business, is knowing when to shift and not being scared to shift sometimes and pivot and try things differently and to inspire your team to go along with that change as well.
And the thing about it is, I've been saying since the very beginning of the pandemic, and I feel like I'm like a broken record player almost, because I've been telling my kids this constantly and other people that I talk to, you got to be mentally flexible because things are in disarray everywhere right now. And there's basically two ways to look at that. Like you said, you can be nervous and afraid and things are in disarray and you can be anxious all the time, or you could look at it as this is an opportunity. This is the time now to strike. This is the time to invest in your skills. This is the time to figure out, hey, what is the world going to need more of, and go fulfill that need. So it's a cliche, but the Chinese word for problem is opportunity. I think the symbol is opportunity. And so I love how you talk about the disruption, not as a negative. You talk about the disruption as an opportunity, right?
1,000%.
Yeah.
You always have to. I've always had to look at those opportunities in my business for sure, especially me, because like I said, I'm in a very specific demographic that's already underserved.
Yeah.
And so we're always trying to find unique ways in to making more content that speaks to that audience and to get across to executives.
Yeah.
Part of the problem we have is there's just not a lot of Latino leadership in our business.
Yeah.
And the people that do call the shots, a lot of them aren't Latinos. And so it's getting across to them the need for this type of content. And aside from the obvious economic opportunity, because they know it, they see the numbers don't lie with Hispanics. They're going to movies where they were at 2.5 times the rate than any other cohort out there. I mean, they're 20% of the population, and they over-index across all platforms. But it's also showing them that there are these great, incredible stories to tell, and that there are these great filmmakers like the David Blue Garcias out there.
Yeah.
That they'll take a chance on, and I'm really happy. And I bring that up again, not to pat ourselves on the back, but that things are changing in a good way. I don't think David Blue Garcia would have had a shot 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Well, that's awesome, Hobbs. You've worked with some very famous actors, producers. You worked with Ed Harris, Viggo Mortensen, Renee Zellweger, Dennis Quaid. You worked on Grey's Anatomy. I'm curious, shifting topics a little bit, about who are some of the, and this is almost like asking you who your favorite kid or your favorite pet is, but who are some of the people that you have worked with, some of the famous people that you've worked with that you really have a high opinion of? Who are some of your favorite actors or actresses that you've worked with?
I love Ed Harris. Ed is amazing. Ed's really about his craft. I learned a lot from Ed. I spent 6 months with him in San
I love him as an actor, by the way. Just
Oh.
absolutely love him as an actor.
And I learned so much from him. He's such a humble man, but he's doing it for the right reasons. He's a real artist. And that's what I've learned. Like, get really good at your craft. Don't do this for the money. Do it because you love it and you care about it and you want to say something. And Ed taught me that on the long drives home between sets, where I drive him around, or sitting on a set where he's sitting there smoking his cigarette, telling me about how storytelling needs to be. It's about the moment to reality, Chapa, and this is how you look at a scene. And so I've learned a great deal. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Ed, not just as an actor, but as a human being. And his partner, who's a dear friend of mine, Robert Knott, who brought me on to, who introduced me to Ed, actually. And that's how I became involved with that project, who wrote Appaloosa and who grew up in Oklahoma in the oil field business. He was, he worked in that business for a long time, and he's an incredible talent. So I have a lot of respect for Ed. Look, I just worked with Dennis Quaid, loved Dennis, had an incredible experience working with him. He really leaned into this film and was a real trooper and really supported the kids. This film has a lot of Latino kids in it, And he just fell in love with the story and was really supportive of them, which I really appreciated. And it just a true professional, shows up on time every day, sits and eats with a crew. It's not, he doesn't go and sit in his trailer and eat, like sits and talks to the dude moving lights or moving a C-stand or whatever. Like he's just a normal, good guy. Who I think is an incredible talent and hell of a human being. He just did he's one of the stars of a series called Lovecraft Country on HBO.
Yeah, no, that's the sci-fi deal that came out, right? Yeah, H.P. Lovecraft deal. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm looking forward to watching that.
He's incredible. He also did a movie called Defy Blood, Spike Lee movie.
Yeah,
incredible. The
Vietnam movie. Yeah,
exactly. So he's actually grew up outside of Dallas. I have a lot of respect for him. He is starring as Murtis, which I'm super excited about for the Murtis Dykeman project. He's an incredible guy. We're also working with Dee Reese, who directed Mudbound on that, and Gina Atwater she writes on Westworld. She's staff there.
Nice.
She's an incredible talent as well. But those are some of the people that come to mind. There's people that I've met in this business that I have a lot of respect for that I haven't actually worked with, but that I've been fortunate to run in some of those A-list circles and meet some really great folks. And I would say you certainly have your fair share of a-holes out there. You also have really good people. And I feel like some of the best people out there are just good, hardworking people. I think Tom Cruise is a really good example of that. I've spent some time with Tom.
Yeah.
And I think the guy is he's one of the biggest movie stars on the planet.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just go through his list of movies, it's incredible. And that guy, when you spend time with him and you watch him on a set and you see how gracious he is with everybody, the way Ed is, and how hard he works and how much he cares, then it all makes sense. It all adds up to you. You know?
It's not, in other words, it's not an accident that a guy like Tom Cruise is as successful as he is, because clearly, and I love hearing that, because one of the things I think we have a problem with right now is we tend to judge people not as individuals, but as groups. And there's this notion that everybody in Hollywood is a liberal asshole.
Right, of course.
But that doesn't mean he's not a great human being.
That's
like
exactly
you're talking about. You meet the guy in person. And so so to me, one of the solutions to a lot of our problems, and I see this, by the way, we haven't done this during the pandemic, but as part of my law business, I'll do focus groups. And what we intentionally bring in the most diverse group of people we can possibly bring in: Black, white, Hispanic, old, young, woman, man, you name it, different religions. And I'll tell you what I figured out: when they're sitting in a room together and they're discussing very important issues, almost nobody is fighting. People, right, when they're together in person, are generally nice to people. It's when we're looking at people on social media, or we're looking them up on the internet or whatever, and we don't actually know in person, we tend to judge people way more harshly than we would in person. But I love to hear that story about Tom Cruise, because I have read that before. I've read about how hard of a worker he is and how nice of a guy he is. And I'll bet you there's a lot of people in Hollywood. I'll bet you the majority of Hollywood is like that.
Yeah, listen, people come from all walks of life, from all over the world out here. But you find, for the most part, you certainly have your difficult creatives to work with. I think a lot of creative people, it's not that they're difficult, it's just they look at things differently, and that's why they are who they are. And
exactly,
that's why they're so talented. And I think sometimes they're relentless in their vision and their point of view, but that's what it takes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure.
It takes that conviction and to stand behind your point of view, your voice, your story, and yourself.
Yeah.
You know, the best thing I learned out of here is, like, when no one else believes, you have to believe.
Yeah.
You know? Because you will get shot down at every corner. I don't care if you're an actor, writer, director, you're going to get a hell of a lot of no's. I can tell you that right now. And get used to it. And that's the first thing I learned, is like, get used to the no's. Yeah. Find a way to turn all those into a yes. And you will eventually. It's like my old man always said, the harder you work, the better your luck gets.
For sure. And, no doubt about that. Yeah.
I think that applies to any business, and my business specifically, because it's a high stakes game, and it's a lot easier for someone to tell you than it is yes. The second they say yes and they got to start writing multi-million-dollar checks, their ass is on the line, right?
Man, Hob, I've kept you for 25 minutes longer than we talked about. And
All right, Brian. Honestly, it's cool.
but I do, if it's okay, if you got a few more minutes, I do have
brother, let's go. Yeah,
a couple more questions I would love to ask you. You got a few more minutes?
of course. Yeah.
Okay. And I've asked this question to just about every guest, but what do you, and you can include the entertainment industry if you want, but just in general, as a leader of people, what are you telling your folks about how we get through these times? And that's number one. And number two is, where do you see us over the next 6, 12, 18 months? Like, where do you see us going as a society, as a country? What do you see what's your prediction of what the future looks like?
Look, in terms of my business and my team, I think I already alluded to this earlier. Certainly, we see it as a disruptive opportunity to affect change in a positive way, to do things differently. It has been advantageous to us. I hate to say it, at the expense of all the bad things happening out there, but it certainly has shined a light on the importance of us coming together as a country, and how inclusivity is very important right now, and how we have to work together and love one another and help one another. It doesn't matter what the color of our skin is, or what our background is, or what culture we come from. We're all Americans at the end of the day. And I'm seeing, I think it's gonna take some, I think, baby steps, but I hope in the next few years that starts to ramp up more, and we start to see more of that inclusiveness and more of that communal support. I'm seeing it out here for sure. I'm seeing it amongst African-American community, the Latino community, Asian American community, a lot of the LGBTQ. It's becoming about how do we respect one another, respect each other's backgrounds, decisions, point of views. And I think the country needs to be thinking that way as well. I think that's how we strive and grow and change some of the rhetoric, the bad rhetoric, and the messaging in the world.
Yeah, and I put this on Facebook a week ago because it was really bothering me, and I wanted to get my thoughts out there. But what has happened to us where we feel like, just to take one example, let's talk about the racial unrest as it relates to police brutality.
Yeah.
Why do you have to either be for or against the police? Why do you have to be either for or against racial fairness? Like, why can't you say the vast majority of police officers are freaking phenomenal people, but there's some bad apples and we need to fix that?
Exactly right.
Why can't we say, look, there is no doubt if you're paying attention, that the minority community in general gets treated differently by law enforcement.
Yep.
But some of that, they need to address themselves. So in other words, why can't we have more than, I mean, why do we have to be on one team or the other? Why can't we all be on the same team is the thought that I have. And you know what? We don't really have much of a choice, in my opinion. As a country, we're either going to realize sometime in the near future that we are in this together and that we're all on the same team, even if we have differences of opinions about certain things. Because if we don't figure that out, it's not going to end well. I'll put it that way. So I love what you talk. I love to hear you talk about inclusivity and realizing that just because somebody disagrees with me about some political something or whatever it is, that doesn't mean they're my enemy. They're still my brother. They're still my friend.
I feel I'm with you 1,000%, brother.
Yeah. Hobbs, I started off the podcast talking about the most interesting man in the world. And I got to tell you, man, Hollywood producer, model, director, actor, cowboy, you truly, and you're very humble. And that's one of the things I love about you, my man. But
thank you.
You truly have lived a remarkable life, and you've got so much more to contribute to this world.
You're doing great things. You are a force for good. You are a positive, inspirational person. And I just love you to death, my man. And I really appreciate you being on the podcast. You are exactly the type of person that I want to put out in the world, because you're so positive and you're out there doing really good things for people. Man, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate all your time. I know how busy you are.
Thank you for saying that, Brian.
Yeah.
No, I have a tremendous amount of love. I have a tremendous amount of love and respect for you. And the fact that you're doing this, man, really inspires me. I mean that. Like the fact that you're a successful lawyer running a law practice, you've got a family, and on top of that, you're running this incredible podcast and exemplifying all these esteemed guests that I think they're incredible leaders. And I'm very humbled to even just be part of this conversation with you. And I commend you for doing what you're doing and shining a light on some really important things that I think we all need to be thinking about and talking about. So thank you so much for having me, and consider me, as you always know, someone that's always going to be your friend and your ally out here and also in Texas. And thank you for letting me participate.
Absolutely. Same back at you, my friend. Would you do me one favor? When you come to Texas next time, would you text me so I can come out and watch you do what you're doing? Or maybe we can even just grab a beer or something.
Absolutely, man. Consider it done, brother.
All right, my man. Good
talking to you, man. Stay safe and healthy out there. Thank you.
You too, brother.
You've been listening to Lessons from Leaders with Brian Beckcom. If you've enjoyed this week's interview, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and keep up with the latest episodes. You can also connect with Brian through his firm at vbattorneys.com.